All right, so get ready because today we are diving into a story that really throws those assumptions about life abroad right out the window.
Yeah, this one's really interesting.
We're talking about a YouTube interview from Living Abroad. And
I've seen that channel, yeah.
yeah, so this American guy living in the Philippines, he shares his experience, and it's wild.
Yeah, and what's interesting is it's not just another travel vlog. It's this guy's whole life. Like, we're talking about some serious life changes here.
Yeah.
How he adapted to a totally different culture and, like, what really pushed him to make that move. Those are some pretty deep questions.
Exactly. And that's what makes this deep dive so fascinating. This isn't just your typical, oh, I moved abroad, look at me kind of story. This guy went from being homeless in the U.S.
Wow.
to, and I'm quoting him here, living like a king in the Philippines.
Okay, so how does that even happen? Like, what's the backstory there?
That's what we're going to unpack, right? What led him to that point. But more importantly, I think, what can we learn from his experience? Because obviously not everyone's going to have the same journey.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But even still, I think it throws these bigger questions into sharp relief. Like, what are we willing to, trade off or give up for a better life? And how do our own, like, cultural biases, our own assumptions shape how we see other places?
Totally.
It's like looking at the world through a different lens.
Exactly. He was dealing with a disability, and then the rising rents, they forced him out of his home. He was at a real low point.
So he was really at a crossroads.
Totally. But here's the thing, and this is what struck me. He didn't just, buy a plane ticket on a whim. This guy seriously considered different countries. He even researched moving to Africa at one point.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow. So he was really thinking about all his options. That shows, he was really proactive. Really thinking, how can I make my life better? Weighing all those different options, which to me speaks volumes about his resourcefulness.
Yeah.
He saw a problem and he was determined to find a solution.
And that's a key difference, right? Because so often you hear these stories of people who move abroad and it's like they just kind of drifted there. But he had a plan, even if it evolved over time.
It adds a layer of complexity that you don't always see. And I think it's really important.
Yeah. And here's where those pre-existing narratives, those ideas we have about different places, they come into play, right?
Oh, totally. Yeah.
Because he clearly had some idea of what the Philippines would be like.
Sure. We all do.
But once he got there, bam, reality hit.
Sometimes it's not what you expect.
Sometimes it's better, sometimes it's worse.
Right, exactly. And that's where those assumptions, they can be so powerful, yet so misleading. It's easy to fall into those traps of thinking, we know what a place is going to be like before we've even experienced it ourselves. And this wasn't just about him, finding paradise. It was about challenging those preconceived notions, those stories we tell ourselves about the world.
And one of the biggest surprises for him was the affordability.
Okay. Yeah, that's a big one for a lot of people.
Oh, absolutely. And he talks about this rotisserie chicken meal he could get for practically nothing compared to U.S. prices.
Yeah. Right. The cost of living can vary wildly from place to place.
Oh, totally. And he had heard all these stories about needing thousands of dollars a month to live comfortably in the Philippines, and his experience was completely different.
Right. It's not always about how much money you have, but how you spend it.
And the lifestyle you choose.
Exactly. It highlights something really crucial. The cost of living isn't just about numbers on a spreadsheet. It's about your lifestyle choices. If you go into a place like the Philippines trying to recreate your life from, say, New York City or something.
Right.
You're kind of missing the point.
You're importing your expenses?
Exactly.
But it wasn't just about the money for him, though. He found a sense of community in the Philippines, a sense of safety that he hadn't felt in the U.S.
Interesting.
So he even found love.
Oh, that's great.
But, and this is a big but,
Oh.
his Filipino fiancé has traditional values, which she openly acknowledges.
Okay, so there's more to this story.
Oh, yeah.
This is where it gets really interesting, I think. I mean, it's one thing to find, a lower cost of living and all that, but to find love, that's huge. But then to navigate those cultural differences, especially when it comes to something as fundamental as relationships, that's where his story goes from interesting to truly thought-provoking,
Yeah.
Because he found this happiness.
Right.
But it's intertwined with these cultural norms that, might not work for everyone.
Right.
He's gaining certain things, but potentially at the expense of others. And that's what I think is so fascinating about his story. It highlights the complexities of cultural adaptation, the trade-offs we sometimes have to make, and how those choices can lead us down these unexpected paths.
Yeah, and he talks about how his fiancée prefers to wash clothes by hand, even though they could afford a washing machine.
Interesting.
She cooks everything from scratch, gets up early to make breakfast, and even ties his shoes for him.
Okay, so she's very traditional.
Very traditional, and he doesn't see it as a bad thing.
That's fascinating. I mean, these details, they really paint a vivid picture of their dynamic, don't they? But it's important to remember, this is just one couple story, right?
Right.
We can't generalize an entire culture from it. It's just a glimpse into their unique experience.
Totally. And he even says, you can't force that American lifestyle here.
Right, you have to be willing to adapt.
He's adapting to a different way of life.
And for him, it seems like a positive experience.
Yeah, he seems happy, which is ultimately what matters, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And, it speaks volumes about the flexibility and open-mindedness needed when you're immersing yourself in a new culture. It's about understanding and respecting those differences, not trying to force your own norms onto a new environment. It's about meeting people where they are.
Totally. And he seems particularly struck by how women dress and present themselves in the Philippines.
Oh, interesting.
He talks about how refreshing it is to see a more natural look, less emphasis on makeup and flashy clothing.
And that's where his personal preferences and maybe even past experiences come into play. Because he's drawing a contrast, right? And that comparison, that's what's shaping his perspective. But it's just that his perspective, it's one viewpoint among many.
Exactly. He brings up the passport bros phenomenon, this online community of men who, basically advocate for dating outside their home countries.
Right. I've heard of that.
And he seems to identify with some of their sentiments.
Yeah, it's a complex topic with a lot of layers.
Mm-hmm.
It's one of those things you have to approach carefully, It's crucial to have those discussions with sensitivity, recognizing that we're talking about individual choices and experiences, not stereotypes.
For sure. And then he mentions Kevin Samuels.
Oh.
Who, is a controversial figure, known for his, his views on relationships and gender roles.
Right.
And it seems like our expat, he resonated with some of Samuel's ideas.
Which, to be fair, might rub some listeners the wrong way.
Right, and that's totally understandable.
It's important to remember that we're looking at one man's story, shaped by his own unique journey and values. It's not our place to judge, but rather to understand how those views fit within the larger narrative of his life.
Yeah, and he talks a lot about finding a partner who shares your values.
Of course, that's important for any relationship.
Right. Someone focused on family and building a life together.
Sure.
And he contrasts that with what he sees as a more, I guess you could say, individualistic dating culture in the U.S.
So he's highlighting that family-oriented nature of Filipino culture, which, to be fair, can be very appealing for those seeking that strong sense of community and connection.
Right.
But it does make you wonder, what do we prioritize in relationships? And how are those priorities shaped by our own culture and upbringing?
Totally. It's like we're conditioned to value certain things without even realizing it.
Absolutely.
And he's clearly impressed by his fiance's work ethic and those traditional values we talked about.
Yeah.
He describes how she takes care of the home and him, cooking, cleaning, even watching him in the shower.
Okay.
And he sees this as a sign of respect and love.
It's just so interesting to see how these dynamics play out in different cultures, isn't it?
Right.
Because what he perceives as positive, and clearly he does, that might not align with everyone's values or relationship expectations.
Right. It's all about perspective.
Exactly.
And he keeps emphasizing that you have to let go of that American lifestyle when you move abroad.
Right. You can't expect things to be the same.
You have to be willing to embrace new customs, try new things, adapt to a different pace of life.
That's key for any major life change, honestly. It's about adaptability, resourcefulness, being open to experiences that challenge your preconceived notions.
Totally. One specific difference he mentions is dating culture.
Oh, how so?
He feels like women in the Philippines are more approachable and less likely to play games, which is interesting. But again, it's just his experience.
Right. It's anecdotal. It's important to avoid making those sweeping generalizations, His experience might be true for him, but you can't extrapolate that to an entire culture or group of people.
Totally.
Every individual is different.
Absolutely. He's a big advocate for humility and being open to learning when you move to a new country.
Which makes sense, right?
It's about recognizing that your way of doing things isn't the only way.
That's a valuable lesson for all of us, I think, no matter where we live.
For sure.
Because it's about being open-minded, willing to see things from different perspectives. It's about recognizing that we all have something to learn from each other.
It's so true. And you know what's so wild is how this one man's experience opens up so many bigger questions, you know?
Tell me about it.
We're talking about cultural differences, economic realities, relationship dynamics, even this, like search for belonging in a globalized world. It's a lot to unpack.
It makes you wonder, what if we all approached our own lives with that same sense of adventure, that same willingness to, challenge the status quo? What could we learn about ourselves, about the world around us, if we just dared to step outside of our comfort zones a little bit more? It's a powerful thought.
I love that.
It's about embracing the unknown.
Right.
Maybe that's where the real growth happens.
And he didn't shy away from the tough stuff either. He talked about his disability, his struggles in the U.S., even his experience of being homeless. But he didn't let those challenges define him.
And that's a powerful message of resilience. The
Yeah.
ability to adapt to new circumstances, to find hope and opportunity, even in the face of adversity. It's inspiring.
Absolutely. And he also talked about being resourceful, finding creative solutions to problems, asking for help when he needed it.
Those are valuable skills no matter where you are or what you're facing. It's about taking ownership of your situation, not giving up on your dreams. It's about knowing that even when things get tough, there's always a way forward. And sometimes it's about reaching out, connecting with others, and allowing ourselves to be vulnerable enough to ask for support.
It's about community. It's about knowing you don't have to go through it alone.
Exactly. We all need a little help sometimes, and that's okay. He could have just given up, when he lost his home, but he didn't. He turned it into something good, a chance to start fresh and build a life that actually felt right for him.
It's kind of inspiring, right? It's like, it's not about the hand you're dealt, but how you play it. He didn't let those challenges hold him back. He used them to redefine his whole life.
But I think we should talk more about those cultural differences he mentioned, especially when it comes to relationships. Oh, absolutely. And his description of his fiance's traditional values really highlights this. Like, he was surprised, maybe even a little shocked, by how much she loves taking care of the home and doing things for him that, let's be honest, he could probably handle himself.
Right, like those everyday tasks.
Exactly. But here's the thing. He sees it as a good thing, a sign of respect and love.
Which makes you think, right, how much does our own culture shape what we consider normal in a relationship?
Absolutely. It's huge. In some cultures, a woman taking care of her partner like that is seen as like the ultimate act of love, putting their needs first. But in other cultures, it might seem a little strange. His experience really throws those differences into perspective, doesn't it?
Totally. And he even said, and I'm paraphrasing here, but he basically said, you can't go to another country and expect them to do things the American way.
Right. You have to meet them halfway.
It's their culture, their way of life. And it seems like he had to let go of certain expectations and adapt to this different way of being in a relationship.
Which is a huge takeaway for anyone who's thinking about intercultural relationships or even just trying to understand different cultures.
Yeah.
There's no one right way to do things. And those differences, they can actually make a relationship stronger.
That's interesting. It's like those differences, instead of being obstacles, they become opportunities for growth.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it makes you think about your own non-negotiables, right? Like, what are you willing to blend on? What are those core values that you just can't compromise on in a relationship?
Right. Where do you draw the line?
Exactly. Now, this guy, he clearly values tradition, family, a partner who embraces those roles. And he's found that in his fiancée. That works for him. But it's not about saying that's the right way. It's about acknowledging that there are many different ways to build a strong, loving partnership.
Absolutely. And let's not forget the economic side of things. He went from struggling to make ends meet in the U.S. to living a pretty comfortable life in the Philippines, even with a partner, which kind of goes against that common assumption that having a partner means higher expenses.
Yeah. Two can live as cheaply as one, right?
Right. He talks about how his fiancée is really frugal, prefers to cook at home, doesn't need the latest gadgets. It's a different mindset.
He even joked that the only way you'd spend $3,000 a month in the Philippines is if you were like actively trying to recreate an expensive Western lifestyle.
Which brings us back to that idea of adaptation, right? If you move somewhere with a lower cost of living, but you're still trying to live the same way you did back home,
You're not really experiencing the place for what it is.
yeah, you're missing the point.
Exactly.
He also had some interesting thoughts on safety and security, too. Like, he felt safer in the Philippines than he expected to based on what he'd heard.
It's amazing how often our perceptions of safety, of what's dangerous, are shaped by things we see in the media or hear from other people.
Totally. It's like we form these ideas without even realizing it.
Exactly. And He had to confront those preconceived notions and form his own opinions based on his actual experiences, which is really important.
Yeah, don't believe everything you hear, right?
Right. Get out there and see for yourself.
He did emphasize being aware of your surroundings, not being too trusting too quickly. He even mentioned potential scams, which, I mean, that's just good advice no matter where you travel.
Oh, absolutely. Being street smart is essential no matter where you go.
Yeah.
But it's also about being open to positive experiences.
Oh, yeah.
Right? Don't let fear dictate how you interact with the world.
That's a good point. Don't let fear close you off from new experiences.
Exactly. And it sounds like he struck a good balance. You know, he talked about how he felt comfortable walking around at night, which is something he wouldn't do back home.
Yeah.
It seems like he found that sense of peace, of belonging in the Philippines.
It's like he found a place where he could finally exhale.
Exactly. And that feeling, that ease of just being, it can be incredibly powerful. It's about finding a place where you feel truly at home, both physically and mentally.
And speaking of feeling at home, he also shared some really interesting thoughts about aging, like how it's viewed so differently in the Philippines. He was surprised, even a little moved, by how much older generations are valued and respected there.
It makes you think about how our own culture treats aging, doesn't it?
It's almost like we're afraid of it.
It's like we try to hide it, push it aside,
Yeah,
and we end up missing out on so much wisdom and experience.
totally. And he talked about seeing older people out dancing, socializing, enjoying life. It made him realize that getting older doesn't have to mean slowing down or disappearing.
It's a beautiful thing to see, honestly. A society that embraces aging, where different generations can learn from each other and celebrate life together.
It's a powerful image. It makes you wonder, what if we could create that kind of intergenerational connection in our own communities? What would that look like?
It's a question worth pondering. And speaking of embracing new perspectives, his whole journey with Filipino food was fascinating too. He went from knowing almost nothing about it to fully immersing himself in the local cuisine.
He was loving it. He couldn't stop talking about those local dishes, Yutan and Mungo, right?
Yeah, and those prices. He was blown away by how affordable the food was.
Yeah.
Especially compared to the U.S.
Yeah, couple of bucks for a delicious home-cooked meal? Sign me up.
Right. And he wasn't just eating at restaurants either. He talked about those bustling local markets, the smells, the energy, the experience of buying fresh produce directly from the source. It's a world away from those sterile supermarket aisles we're used to.
It's a different way of connecting with your food, with the culture.
Exactly. It's an experience.
So it's not that he's saying everyone needs to pack up and move to the Philippines, but he's definitely challenging us to open our minds to different ways of living, different paths to happiness, ways of life that we might not even know about or understand yet.
He's asking us to question our assumptions, to consider that maybe, just maybe, our way of life, our definition of success, isn't the only one out there.
It's about broadening our horizons.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And he's not just talking the talk, he's walking the walk. He's living proof that happiness can be found in simplicity, in connection, in experiences, rather than possessions.
It's about finding what truly matters.
And defining success on your own terms, not by someone else's standards.
And speaking of defining success, he really challenged this idea that you need a ton of money to live a good life.
Oh, definitely. He was very open about living on his disability income, which, let's be real, wouldn't get you very far in most parts of the U.S. these days.
It's tough out there.
It is. But he's making it work in the Philippines. And he's not just scraping by, he's thriving. He's found a place where he can not only survive, but actually enjoy life on a limited income.
It's a good reminder that happiness isn't directly proportional to how much money you have in the bank.
Not at all. He's found contentment, even abundance, in a simpler, more affordable lifestyle. And it's something to think about, isn't it? What if we focus more on what truly brings us joy, what truly matters, instead of constantly chasing after more, more, more? What if we redefined what success looks like?
It makes you question what's really important, doesn't it? Is it about amassing wealth and possessions, or is it about something more? Is it about those everyday moments of joy, those connections with loved ones, the experiences that nourish the soul?
Those are the things that money can't buy. Those are the things that truly matter.
It really makes you question those assumptions we have about what's possible, especially when it comes to finances. Like, we're often told that we need a certain amount of money to be happy, to live a good life, but he's challenging that narrative.
He found a place where he can actually live the life he wants on a budget that would be, let's face it, impossible in many parts of the U.S.
It's pretty amazing when you think about it. And it's not just about the money, it's about finding that sense of belonging, of community. He even talked about finding his tribe overseas. And he mentioned the Passport Bros, that online community we talked about earlier, which I know can be a bit of a sensitive topic.
It is. And it's important to avoid making sweeping judgments or generalizations about entire groups of people. But in his case, it seemed like finding that community, those shared experiences, really helped him navigate those feelings of being an outsider in a new culture.
It's like no matter where we go, we all crave that sense of connection.
Absolutely. It's a basic human need to find your people, those who get you, those who share your values or experiences. And sometimes we find them in the most unexpected places.
Totally. And he didn't shy away from mentioning Kevin Samuels either, that, well, controversial figure in the relationship advice world. And it seems like some of Samuel's views resonated with him.
Which might surprise some people.
It's definitely thought-provoking.
And I think it's a good reminder that people's beliefs, they're complex. They're formed through this mix of personal experiences, cultural influences, things they've been exposed to.
Right. It's not always black and white.
Exactly. So we can listen to his story, try to understand his perspective without necessarily agreeing with or endorsing those views.
Absolutely. It's about being open-minded, hearing different perspectives, even if they challenge our own.
It's about engaging in thoughtful reflection, right? Questioning our own biases. Because there's rarely just one right way of seeing the world.
It's about being willing to learn and grow, even if it means getting a little uncomfortable sometimes. And speaking of challenging assumptions, his experiences in the Philippines really made him rethink his whole view of aging.
Yeah, he was blown away by how well older generations are treated there. Like the respect, the value they're given just for their wisdom and experience.
It's almost like a complete flip from how we often treat aging in Western cultures, isn't it?
It really is. We're so obsessed with youth, with staying young, that we forget to appreciate the beauty and wisdom that comes with age.
And he talked about seeing older people out at clubs, dancing, just living their lives. And it made him realize that getting older doesn't have to mean becoming invisible or irrelevant.
Right. Like you can still live a full, vibrant life no matter how many candles are on your birthday cake.
And that's a powerful message, I think, especially in a culture that often makes people feel like they need to stay young forever.
It's about challenging those expectations and embracing all stages of life.
And maybe learning a thing or two from those who've already walked the path ahead of us.
Exactly. Because they have so much to offer. So as we wrap up this deep dive, we're left with this question. What can we learn from this man's story? How can we challenge our own assumptions about the world, about what's possible, about how we choose to live our lives? Maybe it's time to embrace those uncomfortable questions, to step outside of our comfort zones, and to consider that there might just be a different way of seeing things, a different path to happiness waiting for us. Just like this man found his own unique path to happiness in the Philippines, perhaps we can all find those experiences, those connections, those moments of joy that make life worth living if we're open to them.
And maybe that's the biggest takeaway of all, right? It's about being open to new possibilities, challenging our own perspectives, and embracing the unexpected, because you never know what you might discover. So until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep those deep dive conversations going.